Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Academic Entrepreneurs Webinar Series on Entrepreneur's Life, Creating, Developing, and Funding Startups in a University Setting. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And so this webinar series is actually related to a book that we're putting together. So it's called the book on creating an ecosystem for academic entrepreneurship. So this book is being co-authored by our moderator today, Dr. Bob Hisrich, and NCET2's Executive Director, Tony Stanko. So if you're interested in identifying and nominating an academic entrepreneur for one of the 35 profiles that we're featuring in the book, feel free to email me at riaancheta@ncet2.org. We'll also provide you the link to nominate academic entrepreneur from your university in the questions box or in the chat box of your GoToWebinar control panel. So again, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Now, our webinar will have a moderated discussion between our featured academic entrepreneur and Dr. Bob Hisrich to learn more about how the life of an entrepreneur is when it comes to creating their company in a university. And by the end of the webinar, we'll set aside a few minutes for the audience to ask questions. So if you have questions for either Bob or Matt, our speaker for today, you can type them in the questions box of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll queue in your questions, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can this afternoon. This webinar is being recorded, so all you need to do is go to our webinars page. We'll send you the information in a separate email. The video will be available 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. We also have a few more webinars that you may be interested in watching. So some of our past webinars are hosted in our YouTube channel. And again, all this information will be provided to you in the chat box of your GoToWebinar control panel, as well as an email that we'll send to you after the webinar concludes today. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to feature our speakers today for today's session. So our featured academic entrepreneur is Dr. Matt Bilsky. He's the founder and CEO of Impossible Incorporated, LLC, and he is a professor as well as an academic entrepreneur from Lehigh University. So Dr. Bilsky is a licensed professional engineer. He's also a postdoctoral research associate and adjunct professor in the mechanical engineering and technical entrepreneurship programs at Lehigh University. So Matt started a company called Impossible Incorporated LLC, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that as the webinar progresses. And moderating today will be Dr. Bob Hisrich. He is the co-author of the book, Creating an Ecosystem for Academic Entrepreneurship. Dr. Hisrich is a Bridgestone Professor of International Marketing and the Associate Dean of Graduate and International Programs at the College of Business of Kent State University. So I'll turn it over to them. And Bob, maybe you'd like to begin today's session by starting off today's webinar.
Be glad to, Ria. Thank you very much for such a nice introduction. And before we get to the questions and with Matt, I just want to again emphasize what Ria said. Please think really carefully about some people that you would like to nominate to be in the book. It's going to have incredible distribution throughout the United States, and it probably even will have editions in other languages as well, because this area of academic entrepreneurship now is becoming more and more important for universities as budgets are cut from the national governments as well as from state governments in the case of the United States. And so we really like to make sure that every university has the opportunity to see what entrepreneurs and how they've done it, as well as the actual theory behind it in the 10 chapters that we have. So look forward to that, and also encourage you to get your questions ready, because I think the most important thing for Matt and I is not only to make sure everybody understands how what he has done, but also to be able to answer your questions as well. Either one of us look forward to that. So Matt, it's good to have you with us, and it's really going to be nice to chat with you. And so let me just ask the first question, and that is, what really caused you or had you think about becoming both an academic and an entrepreneur?
Yes, that's a good question, Bob. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And I guess what's fascinating about this whole thing is really I've always been an inventor and had that entrepreneurial mindset, and then kind of found myself into academia. And so I think the best way usually for me to answer this question is to really take a look at who I am and what I am. And so I think a great way to describe myself is that I'm a T-shaped person. And when we talk about a T-shaped person, this is out of the Valve software company. They put their new employee handbook online of what their model innovative employee would be, or an entrepreneur. They're T-shaped, which means they both have like breadth or in a large number of areas, and then depth. And if we think about deep expertise or depth, that's, I guess, the classical definition of a PhD, or the world's leading expert in blank. But taking a step back, I really kind of look at that as, you know, mindset and skill set. That I have an entrepreneurial mindset, which we kind of think of as the 3 C's of creative curiosity, creating personal, business, and societal value, and also pursuing collaborative connections. But then I've really been able to couple that with my engineering skill set, my ability to make things, measure things, and model things. And if you put that all together, you really get me, this T-shaped person, which I have my mindset here and my skill set. And I guess my time here in academia, I've learned the technical term for my skill set and how to develop it. My parents like to joke that, you know, I've been doing the same thing ever since I was a little kid, except for now it costs more and I have more toys. So if we look at, you know, that skill set column and we look at a cross section, well, for me, I'm a mechatronics person, which means I spend my time pretty much equally divided between mechanical, electrical, computer, and control systems. And for each of us, these T-shaped people, if we look at it, we have our own cross section of the T. And you couple my T-shapedness with the fact that I'm a systems thinker. And I guess I define systems thinking as the thought process of a T-shaped engineer like me. And it's having understanding of the interdependencies of a project and the context of what I'm working on in a bigger picture, along with an ability to combine both my mindset and my skill set to create value propositions. And I very much like to take a contrarian point of view to come up with revolutionary new ideas and outcomes. And I guess really being reflective on myself, I guess I've always been labeled as a divergent thinker, but I'm able to couple that with convergent action. And I guess that's really the systems thinking and the T-shaped in me that allows me to do what I do.
Yeah, let me explore that a little bit with you before we go to the second question. So how, if I'm an academic, and I've created my own companies as well, but if I'm an academic at another university, we'll say, how do I get comfortable with thinking about being the entrepreneur instead of just being a researcher?
That's a great question about how to, I guess, couple academia and that entrepreneurial mindset. And there are some national organizations such as Keene that are working on distilling at the undergraduate level that mindset into academics. And I guess we're going to talk about this a little later on in the webinar. But one of my big focuses is that we can start thinking about using this entrepreneurial mindset and creating value with our research. And if we look at what they're asking for with NSF proposals, they're looking for your ability to translate your research into startups, into industry, even if you're on a basic fundamental researching level.
Good. Yeah, I think that helps because sometimes it's very confusing for people to understand that you can be both and still be very successful. I have a purist in terms of your research and articles and things like that, and actually do it. So.
And one more point, I guess, to that is people, I think, get caught up on the word entrepreneurial, and that instantly connects in their mind to being an entrepreneur, starting a business. But if you really look at the definition of entrepreneur, you can really go through the definitions and end up at enterprising. Somebody who has that tenacity, that drive, the characteristics of an entrepreneur, what allows them to succeed are things that people who aren't starting companies can do. And as we look towards rewarding in academia, especially being a producer. So building value and having a large impact beyond just how much research dollars we get to. Then you can start thinking about that whole entrepreneurial mindset about being an intrapreneur and being impactful with your work.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's great, Matt. Thanks for adding that, because I think that's helpful when you think of it in terms of value creation and that versus just being an entrepreneur, because you basically are creating value in a different way by doing that. The thing that really interests me in terms of some of the things I've read about you and some of your stuff is this entrepreneurial mindset dissertation. Could you um, uh, explain that to us and why this approach is useful?
Yeah. So I've been at Lehigh now. This is my 11th year here. I did undergraduate, then ended up in graduate school, master's, PhD, and then postdoc and faculty. So I've really seen this all through many different lenses. And I was not the typical person who would end up in graduate school, but I was recruited by a faculty member who saw my abilities to make things and my, I guess, engineering prowess, let's say. And so I started off, like many PhD students, in the traditional PhD program. So at Lehigh, at least you can get accepted into a PhD and you still can do your master's as part of the PhD. So when I define the traditional research model, I consider it to be a faculty-centric model where you have your faculty expert advisor, the guru, and they drive the research project. They write grants through their university to fund the project, and then they hire graduate students to work on the research. In exchange for those students working for them, they pay for their graduate school. And in this model, really knowledge is passed down from the faculty down to students. And I mean, this is the tried and true method. To my knowledge, pretty much everybody with a PhD, in terms of a research PhD, ends up going through this way. But you take me, who at times could be a square peg in a round hole, this tried and true entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 13. I've always been that sort of person. Well, how do I fit into this traditional research model? And then it occurred to me that I was basically being funded as a teaching assistant for my time teaching, which meant that if they're paying me to teach, my research was essentially unpaid. It was for whether it's the faculty member. Now, if you're a research assistant, it's different, but as a teaching assistant, which I was at the time, it really was like, okay, well, my funding is tied to teaching, so then maybe I can drive my research and pursue what I'm interested in, my own 3Cs, my curiosity, and build my own connections. And that led me to the entrepreneurial minded dissertation, which is really student-driven research. And it's a student-centric model where the graduate student proposes their own project and writes their own grant to fund it. And they're working on a real-world project towards commercialization. And so the project is completely driven by the student. My advisor said, basically, I'm not your dad, I'm not your boss, I'm not your coach. I will advise you through the process, but you need to be the one driving it. So he was my mentor and guided me. And I think that this helps bridge the gap between traditional research and entrepreneurship. Back to what we were just talking about, is how do you go from pure academia, which is traditionally the traditional research model, to entrepreneur, where you basically, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to do it. And as a result, it becomes a two-way street between the faculty advisor and the PhD student, where knowledge flows both ways. And then in terms of implementing this, I was actively involved first as an advisor, then the teaching assistant, and now the professor for the integrated product development or technical entrepreneurship capstone course here at Lehigh. And we use this 5-step integrated product development process, which for basically taking a concept and bringing it to market, you start with opportunity scanning, move to conceptual design and product planning. Then you go through the parallel detail development towards ramping up for manufacturing and market, ultimately selling service and support. And one of the things I did with my dissertation is says, well, we don't need to think about entrepreneurship and business and basic research as two separate things. These 5 steps, you need to do those whether you are a faculty member. Opportunity scanning, what are your funding opportunities? Conceptual design, okay, well, let's say I'm writing a journal article. Well, what do I have to do to be able to make it into that journal? What does my tenure committee want? So we can take this traditionally product development process and apply it to research and kind of break down those barriers. So this was the framework of my dissertation and my work. And if I look at how I actually implemented this on a more detailed level, what I did was my EMD was basically a collaboration between Lehigh and my company. So at Lehigh, I was enrolled as a full-time mechanical engineering PhD student. I received my full tuition and stipend as a teaching assistant. And then this gave me access to university resources such as the machine shop and all the expertise here at the university. In parallel, I founded my company, Impossible Incorporated LLC, in 2013. And that's also what we have here in Pennsylvania called a Keystone Innovation Zone, which has a number of startup opportunities and funding. So basically, through my company, I applied for startup grants to fund the research I was working on. My time was paid for by Lehigh for teaching, and then I funded my research through the company. So I'd enter business plan and pitch competitions, and then ultimately I'd be able to commercialize my research through the company. And so a result of this whole thing is that because I funded the research myself, not the university, I was only paid for teaching. So it's a very clear distinction. I was paid to teach, and then I researched essentially on my own time with my own funding, and I used resources available to all students. By at least the policies here at Lehigh, it meant that I retained full ownership of all the IP I generated, which means all the patents on the snake-like robot that we'll talk about later are owned by me. And to my knowledge, this is almost never the case with traditional research. And so I was very careful with how I created everything, and so I got to walk away with my intellectual property in my own name.
Great. Well, that's really the way to do it if you can. Do you think that Lehigh obviously has allowed this in your case and probably others as well, but do you have any idea whether this would work at other universities, this kind of approach?
I would assume so. So to my knowledge, I'm the first person to do this, and I welcome anybody in the audience because the only way I've been able to do this research is a straw poll. So if anybody has heard of somebody doing this, please let me know. But to date, and I've talked about this at a number of conferences, I haven't had anybody chime in and said we've seen this before. Right now, like my current TA, he is doing an EMD in the sense of we've now allowed him to drive his PhD program. So being the TA for the course for 4 years, while he decided not to start his own company, he was free to figure out what research excited him and pick a faculty member. So his graduate experience was no longer tied to the funding. So in that sense of an EMD allows a student to do their own curiosity, connections, creating value, I think anywhere is possible so long as there's funding available for teaching assistants. To the point of owning your own intellectual property, the way I learned about this was I sat down and I read all the documents on Lehigh's IP website. And I think so many times in life, if you read the fine print, you find out about all sorts of cool things. Well, I'd say there's got to be a lot of other universities where reading through, if the research is paid for by the student and the student is not paid as a research assistant, basically they're just paid to teach, then I believe that it would probably work out at other universities too.
That's interesting because I'm just doing the chapter in the book that Ria mentioned on that ownership policies of universities. And one of the things we're comparing 25 universities in the United States is that very factor of not only ownership policies, royalty policies, et cetera, but can you actually, as a student particularly, be able to own your own patents and things like that. And surprisingly, we've only gotten to a couple of the universities, but I think there's more universities than not that have that option for students particularly.
Yeah, and I'd say it's also, and I think we'll come to this with things I experienced going through, owning IP is expensive for universities. And by owning, I mean the act of filing and pursuing. So even with their faculty members, the university, when a faculty member in a traditional setting where by the letter of the law, the university owns the IP. Well, if a faculty member discloses it, then it's in the university's lap to say, are we going to spend the $50,000 to $150,000 just to patent this, let alone continuations and defense and all those other things. So I think to your point, yes, there is a lot of opportunity for universities to have it open to people to own their IP.
Yeah, good point. Great. Well, let's turn to your actual project and patent of the snake-like robot, and tell us about it and its uses. I found it fascinating when I was reading about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I guess a little background on me, as it's probably coming to light. I have a a wide array of things that I've been involved in. And one of the things I started when I was undergraduate at Lehigh was I became superintendent of properties for one of the off-campus landlords. And I had always been building stuff, but then I became a licensed contractor. And working with the landlords, I helped participate in the renovation of over 30 plaster and lath houses. And I can't tell you how many times we finished the renovation, the landlord would go, crap, we forgot to run cable to all the rooms. Do you mind running cable TV? And in my mind, I'm like, we just had every wall open, right? So
Yeah.
I got tired of, well, what am I most familiar with? What's a problem? And I said, this is something I can solve. So my initial goal was to develop a snake-like robot that can drive, drill, and see within walls to run wires without a mess. And so if we look here, it's 1 inch in diameter. You put it in through an outlet-sized hole. It drives through the wall and then drills through, and it kind of braces itself. So it's designed to mimic how I drilled as a contractor. It also have a camera so it can see inside. And so this is just showing about the motions, how it would go from sealing between the joists into a wall. So again, that's what I started out doing. And this is about 6.5 years ago, or I guess 5.5 years ago now. That was the initial problem I went out to solve. But then what I ended up with, and if you look at my dissertation, it's an IP portfolio of intelligent mechanisms that are also the world's smallest and strongest. So kind of the 4 big things that I've ended up developing is the first robotic joint that can both extend and rotate, along with being able to lock in a single joint. And it's also miniature. So not only can it do all these things that traditionally you would need multiple joints to do, but it can also do it in that 1 inch package. And then to power everything and make it actuate, I've ended up developing the smallest, strongest gearboxes. And I've developed 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional arrangements of the cycloidal drive. If you look over here too, where I circled here, this is a gearbox that's 1 inch long. It's basically looks like your thumb, except for your pinky fits through the middle. And here is 30 pounds hanging off of it. So it's hollow, yet can do more. So it is orders of magnitude stronger than anything else out there. I've also come up with a lot of different ways of doing long distance power transmission. And the big thing we do with the robot is we split a power drill in half and put a flexible drive shaft through the whole thing. That's why all the mechanisms are hollow. And so I've come up with ways of doing flexible drive shafts and a lot of different bends. And then one of the big things our customers were worried about is what if we hit a wire on the backside of a stud or a pipe that's there? So that led to us working on developing a radar-based obstacle mapping system. So all 4 of these things, again, I started out trying to run wires to the wall. And in the end, I just created a whole set of intelligent mechanisms. And this has led to so far 4 provisional patents and a PCT application. So I've turned in over 600 pages of intellectual property to the patent offices. Right now, we're working on nationalizing in 7 different countries and regions the first joint that can extend. So this first mechanism here. Working through, though, all of those mechanisms I told you about, yes, they could be used to run wires through walls without the mess, but they have a number of other applications, such as rescuing trapped victims. Let's say fluid control, we can automate and miniaturize valves. Prosthetics, we can make smaller and stronger limbs. We could do it in suspensions for automobiles, make smaller and stronger tools and consumer products. From the defense perspective, whether we're inspecting tight spaces or doing maintenance in there, or working on combat exoskeletons, basically those core technologies can be integrated into pretty much any mechanical system that needs them. And so my critical next steps with this whole project is I'm working to partner with companies who want to utilize these technologies in new and existing products. So I can provide integration and engineering design services and then license or sell the technologies, be it application-specific licensing or sale or one or more of the technologies to the company, but also working with them to develop further intellectual property. And so in order to do this, I'm working on raising about $500,000 per year for the next 3 years to support ongoing development and build out my team towards commercializing. And with all of this, the goal is to generate ongoing revenue for my investors, stakeholders, and partners within these 3 years.
Have you identified yet where your source of money is going to come from, or is that in process?
In process. So I've had a number of different meetings so far, and I'm continuing to meet with people. So if anybody out there knows anybody I should be talking to, appreciate the contact. But I've talked to some, multi-million-dollar international companies where I'm working right now with a gearbox manufacturer to commercialize one of the designs. But I'm really working on finding those right strategic partners to go forward with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, good luck to you. I sure hope you are able to raise the money because I find this whole project very, very interesting. And robotics is definitely the wave of the future. Let's turn to the fourth question then in terms of, uh, there's all kinds of rumors. And of course, I hope in this book to flush out these things as well. So tell me, how did the university help you in becoming this entrepreneur and creating the company that you have?
That's a good question. And I'm a very, again, reflective person, having talked about myself here. And so, as I mentioned, I've been here for now going on 11 years. And so I've been involved in a number of programs. And we talk a lot about this with our students as we're working to develop entrepreneurial mindsets in them, is how many of them came in with it and we nurtured them to it, or how many did we start at zero and give it to them? And how does that all fit in? Well, if we look at what we have here at Lehigh, and I guess this works really well with the title of your book there, here is a diagram of Lehigh's entrepreneurship ecosystem. And going back to my first slide where I said you have the entrepreneurial mindset and the engineering skill set, well, the third piece in order to enable all of this is an entrepreneurship ecosystem to foster those. So here at Lehigh, we have these three circles here. So the innermost circle are the related organizations. So these are the organizations surrounding the university who help support entrepreneurs like me. And what I did was I highlighted in this purple color things that I've been involved with. So examples are PETA, or the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Technology Alliance, or the Small Business Development Center, our Office of Tech Transfer, the Pennsylvania Department of Community Economic Development. Those are related organizations to support entrepreneurs through the university like me. Then here inside of the university, we have the educational programs that work on fostering entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurship. So things that I've been involved with is this KEEN program, the Current Entrepreneurial Engineering Network, along with the Technical Entrepreneurship Capstone, which is what I currently teach. But that program, we partner students for their senior design course with industry sponsors working on product development in a business context. And we have a number of other programs here that help foster entrepreneurial mindset and skill set here at the university. And then we have surrounding all of that, the infrastructure and other related courses that help out. So things that I've competed in are our Eureka pitch competition. And then we had an internship program. And then just in general, student innovation opportunities. And just here's a number of programs here at Lehigh that build out our entrepreneurship ecosystem. Now, working with the university, as I said, I funded the project myself by writing my own startup grants. So here's the list to date of the grants I received to support it. So in total, $162,000 in non-dilutive funding, meaning I still own 100% of the intellectual property. And these are from organizations, like I said, the pitch competition internally here at Lehigh, the Keystone Innovation Zone in South Bethlehem, which is designed to keep startups here and help build out the startup culture in Bethlehem. It's a Pennsylvania program, and Bethlehem has one. We also have Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation, the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Technology Alliance, whose goal is to partner academic research with Pennsylvania companies for collaboration, and Pennsylvania PSU's, Penn State University's Launchbox program. So I've been involved in a number of different programs, and these have funded cash in the sense of materials to continue prototyping, labor in terms of interns, and capstone design teams. So if we look at really how I built this whole thing out at the university and the timeline, here's the timeline of my EMD, or my entrepreneurial minded dissertation program. So I spent my first year of grad school doing, let's say, the traditional thing, or essentially my master's. And then in the May of 2013, so at the end of my first year, is when I had that aha moment and started my way on this entrepreneurial minded path. So I started my PhD program that we're talking about here. I did the general exams. So these things highlighted in yellow are what every PhD student does at the university. But along the way, I did a number of entrepreneurial minded things, such as our pitch competition. I tied for second place, first loser in the Lemelson MIT competition, filed my own patents. And if we look at how we break it down, I talked about how I followed the 5-step integrated product development process all along. Well, I spent the beginning doing opportunity scanning and conceptual design, then detailed design. Yeah, I had to write a dissertation. But right now, as I'm doing the detailed design and ramping up, that's my postdoc and beyond. And we also look at the funding of these sort of things, opportunity scanning. which is before I got any of the grants, is kind of the inexpensive part. And then I've been writing more and more grants and competitions to help fund the detailed development. And so where am I now at the university? I call it the Lehigh Incubator. I'm a postdoc research associate. So I'm funded indirectly through the Keene program to teach the TE capstone course here at Lehigh. I've also adjuncted for additional courses. And what this does is it provides me with the 12-month salary and benefits, which solve what I call the innovator's dilemma. You know, how do I pay rent, my insurance bills, and put food on my table? And by doing this for the past 2 years, it's allowed me to continue working on the snake-like robot when I'm not teaching. So I have an office here at the university. I continue collaborating with other faculty and students, and I've been working on writing further grants and really also working on funding the startup. And so this incubator is essentially coming to the end. December 31st, 2018 is going to be my last day here at the university. And so my plan is to exit the university into the company full time. And what I'm going to do is continue maintaining my relationship with the university, becoming a visiting researcher. So essentially I'll still have an affiliation, but I'll no longer be on the payroll. So the goal is leave Lehigh into Impossible Incorporated full time. And so if we look at kind of what the university has enabled in terms of, you know, the team and management, so you have me, I got my PhD here, but then I've also along the way had a number of ad hoc pro bono business advisors. I had a PhD committee, and I have colleagues who are world leading experts in a number of different areas. I've also been able to work with local and national business leaders and also economic development officials, both local, state, and national. And then along the way, I've had 53 student interns and researchers. So 33 capstone students, 5 teams over 3 years, and then 5 MBA students, and this was at a neighboring university through the Keystone Innovation Zone. But then here I've had 5 undergraduate student researchers, 4 graduate student researchers, and I've also been able to hire 6 graduate undergraduate interns.
Good. I think too, it's really interesting, and I hope all of you in the audience can see, because I have a feeling that every one of your universities has at least some of those same kind of things with different names, of course, for funding opportunities. I think that chart, if you go back to the next chart after this
one,
the sources of there. I know Ohio has them. I know Arizona has them, or universities I've been. And I think that's probably, I think you're right on the money. I think there's probably these kind of things in every single university in every single state. Have you seen that as well in your experience?
So having traveled around, and I'll be, if anybody's going to be at the University Economic Development Association UEDA conference in October, I gave a talk last October there with our former VP for government relations, talking about kind of doing this sort of thing from administrators and then my PhD advisor faculty perspective and my student perspective. And so I had a woman approach me from University of Alaska, and they had an incubator program about where they were working on something that actually correlated with some other research. So anecdotally, I've come across programs, and I was in Montana over spring break, and I picked up a brochure. It was about Montana economic development. So I think we're seeing a lot of places where they're doing tax incentive zones and grants to do this. And then just being involved with Keene and other organizations, I've seen other schools who have pitch competitions and things like that.
Yeah, very true. And you know, one thing we should remember too is NSET 2, we actually are creating this National Angel Fund, which will be available to people like yourself and professors like yourself, and also have opportunities for professors to we have presentations on their technology at some of our events across the country. Like I think you're going to be at the one in Baltimore, or are you going to be the one in Houston?
I'll be in Baltimore in 2 days with you.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
be
Well,
there for the fall Mid-Atlantic Autumn Conference.
right. And a few days, and then we have one in Houston as well as other cities. So look at the NSET 2 list, and you can see a lot of places that some of you professors may want to think about giving at least applying to give a presentation and having your technology validated by a corporation, and then perhaps get funding through a lot of different programs that are available. So finally, of course, it's always the question that's the hardest to think about and ask, but you hear all kinds of stories, some of which may or may not be true, but tell me the problems that you faced, because it's nothing is pure in any system.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, I distilled it to a couple of problems that are hurdles, problems, missing gaps that I've experienced. But I mean, I think having been here for a long time, I really got to see the system and build a lot of solid relationships. And you couple that with my personality. And so, all things considered, I think I managed to do this pretty straightforward. I had an old motto, though, keep it off my department chair's desk, since I wasn't sure how this whole thing was going to work out. But looking back on it, it was actually a fairly smooth road. But one of the areas I ran into some hurdles was with intellectual property. As I mentioned early on, because of the way I structured this, I knew from Lehigh's IP documentation that I own the intellectual property. But when I was first getting ready to start filing provisional patents, I wanted to see if I could get the university to be my big stick, per se. So in exchange for some ownership of the IP, would they file the patents and cover the fees, and also help in enforcing them, since we are a much larger entity than just Matt Bilsky. But they lacked the ability to assist me in filing them. They didn't know how to take on somebody else's IP that they didn't already own. And I'm sure that this probably isn't a Lehigh only issue, but it would have been nice to have some mechanism for me to license part of the IP back to the university in exchange for legal services. Or I know some other universities, Penn State has their pro bono legal help session there, where I guess because they have a law school, they have an IP clinic there. I didn't know about that until about a year and a half ago, and they really only do domestic patent filing. So in reality, I was able to fund the patents with grants and all, but just thinking about how to handle intellectual property when it's not the traditional intellectual property. So that was the one hurdle. And I think the other thing that I'm now experiencing myself is the what's next question. So, as a Lehigh employee and a Lehigh student, getting internal grants from Lehigh or South Bethlehem or PETA, I call the program manager and say, do you have any funding? And I'm thinking about this. What do you think about that idea? It's a very face to funding program. The hurdles to get those fundings are not that crazy. And so I've been extremely successful in that. But to date, none of these funds have paid my salary at all. And they've only supported other students in the research. But as I go to get into working for the company full time, I now need to figure out how to fund the actual startup, how to, get a facility, get a full team built out, those sort of things. And so I'm going to call them the friendly organizations, to, SBIR, STTR, where you have a marginal chance of getting the grant, and you have to, go to the PMs, and it's a very difficult process to even apply for, let alone win. Or you have things like venture capital, and here we're talking about fundraising. So between where I am here at the university, where I got to that $162,000, and basically that, let's say, $1.5 million for 3 years that I need to keep going, there's not really a good stepping stone to connect the dots from here to there. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I've faced. And I know by doing this, it's come to the attention of some people at the university, because we're a nonprofit. And so there's been talk about, well, how do nonprofits invest in for-profits, and how do we have internal angels and things like that. So I think my biggest hurdle, and I keep coming back because this is what I'm dealing with today really, is the missing step between the funds I have and how to get to that next level of funding.
Yeah, that's something that NCET 2 has really been looking at quite a bit, and looking at several different approaches. One, of course, is for the university to set up its own venture capital network, not a fund, a network. And when you set up a network, then you don't have the legal liability of being an investor. You're just really providing information. I've set this up at 2 other universities I've been a part of, and looking at doing the same thing here at Kent. And then the other mechanism that I think is going to be helpful is, even if the network isn't totally associated with the university, there's a lot of venture capital networks around the country. The United States obviously has more than any other country in the world. So I think the more we can help NSET 2 and others and yourself as well, people understand where this money is and then what you have to do to obtain it, I think that will help fill that gap, because I think you have identified the real problem in bringing technology out of the university is right there.
Thank you.
So I hope you're able to raise the money, and I look forward to seeing your robot in action all over the United States. Well, Rhea, I think we can want to leave a little time for questions from the audience, so I'll turn that over to you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Matt. That was a really good conversation. We have about a dozen questions lined up here. So let me just quickly start. Bob, let me know when you can see my screen, and I
Okay,
should have the first question up. Here you go.
no, you do. Thank you. So the first question, thanks audience for asking these, because this is to me what's fun. Should a TTO focus on working with the willing faculty that already have the entrepreneurial bug, or do you believe the entrepreneurial mindset can be developed, taught into those who do not have it? And then it goes on. I think you can read the question yourself, Matt. So any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah. Let me get back here. So I'm just rereading the question in my mind. So should that technology transfer office focus on working with the willing faculty that already have the bug, or do you believe entrepreneurial mindset can be developed, taught in those that do not have it? So I guess to that first question, I was thinking about that last night actually when I knew we were going to be talking about this, because there's a lot of things, and I think one way to explain it is you can teach somebody to play baseball, but you're not necessarily going to teach them how to be a professional baseball player. So yes, entrepreneurial mindset can be taught, and there's organization. I keep coming back to this KEEN, this current entrepreneurial engineering network that's partnered with in the 30, like somewhere in the 30s right now. They're going up to 49 universities or 75 universities. I forget the number, but on instilling that into students, and then they're teaching faculty how to have an entrepreneurial mindset themselves. In terms of should the technology transfer office work with faculty who have the bug, it's a tough question. I guess the answer is kind of yes, they should help everybody. And I think that developing programs for both, there's no one answer program to both needs. You're going to need, and I think like things like the Small Business Development Center that we have through Lehigh, they have how to have a startup workshops and things like that, working their ways up. And I guess having started the EMD myself, I can see, and I'd love to work with other people to, I'm going to call it a franchise, it's the worst word, but build out this at other places and see how to answer that question better. And then how do you incentivize faculty to participate in being mentored? Well, if you go on my YouTube channel, I gave a talk where some of these slides are from on the next generation of entrepreneurial minded faculty and T-shaped people. And if we think about where the funding is coming and all of this, we're going to need to see a shift from funded basic research, because the federal government is not funding that the way it used to industry sponsored research and more entrepreneurially minded and thinking about, okay, well, can I be entrepreneurial while doing my basic research? And I think as we see tenure and promotion, hopefully starting to reward, I'm going to again call it producing versus who brought in the most federal research dollars outright, we can see all this coming together, that these faculty will feel encouraged to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think also the faculty member, he or her have to really know that this is one aspect that they might want to pursue as well as the traditional things. And I think, quite frankly, some will not, and I think it's probably better they don't. And those that can see that this is an opportunity, then I think they should go ahead and do it. So let's turn to the second question, because I'd like to get through a few more. We can do that all night. So do you see any Lehigh equipment or facilities in the research? If so, I believe Lehigh would be eligible for the shop rights. That's a good question in terms of ownership.
Yes, so there's a great term in Lehigh. The answer to your direct question is yes, but I used facilities and equipment that were commonly available to all students. So the university didn't buy me a $1 million space to work in that only I could work in which case you'd be 100% correct. But at least how Lehigh phrases it if you're using, I use the student shop, a shop that any student can go in and work in, that still keeps the IP in my pocket. And
Yeah,
I have a signed letter from OTT to that
sure.
effect.
Yeah, and I think if all of you look at your university policies, ownership policies, you'll find them far more lenient for students and faculty. So just take a look at your ownership policies and see if the same might apply in your school as well. So Ria, the next question. Okay, was there ever, these are great questions. We got a great audience, Matt. Was there ever a time when you got discouraged?
So I think that moment was at the end of my first year of grad school when I was the traditional student, and I had definitely followed the money a little bit, and I was like, it's not too late to tap out and go move back to Colorado and go skiing or something. So, no harm, no foul. And then I switched to this program, and I must say, I'm very fortunate in how smoothly it went. And I mean, not patting myself on the shoulder too much. It definitely was through, working hard to make it that way. But because it was what I owned, whenever somebody asked me who I worked for, I worked for myself. So the way I really looked at it is, I got a PhD for doing what I would have been doing anyway. And Lehigh funded me to do it. So in some senses, of course, I had those up and down moments, and I joke, if you don't cry in grad school, they don't give you a degree. But that said, I think because, again, it was me driving it, I really had a much better experience than some of my peers or friends who have had to be on the roller coaster.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. I've created several companies myself, and there are definitely discouraging moments. And if you think the road from idea to a viable company developing and marketing a product in the marketplace is an easy one, it is not. So you just have to understand that if that's your goal, there's going to be some discouraging moments that you're going to have to overcome. And hopefully each and every one of you that are part of this seminar will do that and overcome them. So Ria, our next question. Okay, does Lehigh consider Matt's entrepreneurial endeavors in his tenure process? That's very good.
That's a great question.
Yes,
so I guess to back up, I am not tenure track. I am a postdoc and a adjunct professor. I am leaving the university. I turned in my 8-month notice back in April. I turned down a full faculty position, but I did not pursue the tenure track. And I think that this question gets to the heart of why I didn't pursue that. I think in 5 years, if 5 years ago I wouldn't have been able to do what I did because the technology wasn't there, I think 5 years from now, we're going to see a large shift in a lot of universities, how they consider entrepreneurial endeavors and impactful work. And I guess an example is writing a book weighted the same as publishing in a prestigious journal? How many people read that journal article versus how many people read that book? Yet the journal article tends to have a higher weighting in your tenure promotion these days. So I think that these all kind of come together. And should I, let's say, go to a different university or come back to Lehigh, I would very much need it to be considered part as a positive. And I've been to some national conferences where we've had these discussions, and it's very fascinating to hear the talk on this, especially at the dean and associate dean level.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Matt. I think that's going to be a thing that universities are going to have to wrestle with on their individual by individual cases. I know, I've published 45 books and 300 plus articles and yet start companies. So it's going to be interesting 5 years from today to look back and see what's changed and what hasn't changed. And hopefully at least some recognition of company formation and value creation will creep into this tenure decision process, but who knows? And do we have time for another question, Ria?
Yeah, I think we have time. We still have 9 minutes.
Oh,
Here's the
good.
next one.
Well, this is wonderful. So there you go. How do you decide to utilize your time between the company and Lehigh to justify a full-time, well, I think
that's a beautiful question. And I guess the best way to answer that is with a lot of different hats. And in terms, back to the IP question, I need to be very careful what hat I have on at any given time. So my research here as a postdoc research associate is working on things that are related to my company's work. So it's a very blurred area, very grayed, but actual intellectual property creation, my average work day, now given I also have a very good work-life balance, but I'd say I work anywhere between 60 and 70 hours a week. So my 40 hours, and of those 40 hours, I've taught anywhere from 1 to 3 classes in a semester. So when you actually break down the time, it's just important for me to know, okay, what activities are general research versus explicit business development, things like that. So I guess I've found a very good niche existence here at the university. And that's part of why I've stayed this long. But if I were to continue going forward, this would be a much larger question if I transitioned into a traditional faculty role.
Yeah, that would make a big difference in how you would have to answer that question, how you'd have to devote your time. So, Ria, let's have one more question, and then so you're a private university, and this is a good one because I have been at private and public. I'm at a public university now. So do you have any thoughts on that, or I'll lend you mine?
I can give like a quick answer. Maybe we'll get to one more. I have done conflict of interest disclosure to the university, and also we've had to do things where I don't grade students who are working on projects directly related to my company and things like that. So we have had to be mindful of conflicts of interest, but I couldn't speak to public versus private.
Yeah, I'll just address that. I think you're going to find public universities, and depending on the state, of course, that it's in, are going to be a little more difficult than private universities to deal with. But hopefully, we see some examples of even state-funded universities, or what we'll call public universities, having pretty good policies on this as well. So, but I think it is definitely different and harder at a public university than a private university.
And also, I think scale has something to do with that too. Lehigh is 1,700 graduate, 5,500 undergraduate. A lot of public universities are much larger, especially the research institutions. Right. So I think you'll deal with different hurdles, also depending on the scale of the university.
Good point. I would totally agree with that.
Okay. I think, Bob, we have time for one more question.
Great. Ria, you're good. This is perfect. Okay. So we're creating a program, this university, to encourage entrepreneurship. And what kind of programs do you have at Lehigh or Kent to encourage this kind of behavior? So you want to mention the Lehigh programs?
Yeah, so on the undergraduate level, we have an entrepreneurship minor. Our College of Business has entrepreneurship classes also. And we have the technical entrepreneurship capstone, along with our integrated business and engineering program and our computer science and business program. And we also have, then on the master's level, my PhD advisor created what's called the Technical Entrepreneurship Masters. It's a 1-year, 30-credit master's degree in technical entrepreneurship. And what we're moving towards is encouraging our PhD students, because we now have a certificate program in technical entrepreneurship as well, is getting our PhD students to do a minor. And they take classes in IP creation and integrated product development, building out that T version of themselves where, their actual PhD classes are here, but let's give them that mindset across. And I think we're going to post the slides Ria said, but we have that diagram. And again, for anybody out here, if you have questions for myself or Bob, please either via Ria or if you Google me, you'll find me, send me an email, and I'm happy to discuss further offline.
Good. Yes, and just to close, Kent State has both a major and a minor in entrepreneurship at the undergraduate level. We have pitch competitions and business plan competitions and incubators and those kinds of things. And at the master's level, we have a certificate program, and actually you can concentrate in entrepreneurship at that level as well for the MBA program. And then at the PhD level, we actually have a PhD in entrepreneurship. So I think you'll see quite a few universities having these kinds of programs and emphasizing this. And I really like Lehighs, this Masters of Technology Entrepreneurship 30 course thing. I created one of those at a previous university, and they're really fantastic in order to create this technology and this entrepreneurial mindset. So I want to just thank you on behalf of Matt and I, and then Ria will close out our webinar. And if you have any questions, I agree with Matt, send them to NSET2. I think it's the easiest way, but Matt and I are obviously Googleable as everybody is. So.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bob. And thanks, Matt, very much for your time today. We actually do have some questions still on the queue, but we ran out of time. So as Bob said, if you'd like to forward questions to be answered offline, you can send them to us. My email address is on the screen, and we could forward them directly to Matt or to Bob. As we mentioned earlier, like, this webinar series is actually part of a book that Bob is co-authoring with NSET2's executive director, Tony Stanko, and it's about creating an ecosystem for academic entrepreneurship. So if you're interested in nominating yourself, if you're an academic entrepreneur or someone from your university, the link was posted in the chat box of the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can email me directly so I could send you more information about that. And also, related to what Bob mentioned earlier about the National Angels, we are screening startups now for our next showcase, which will be at the Global Corporate Venturing Conference in Houston, Texas on November 8 and 9. So all the startups that are being screened for this showcase are going to be part of the portfolio of companies that we are screening also for the National Angels. So if you're interested to know more, send me an email as well, or you could submit your startup pitch deck. A non-confidential pitch deck will do, just to start us off, and you can submit that to submissions@nset2.org. And the deadline just for this showcase is on September 30th, but we do have a couple more lined up in 2019. So hopefully the universities and the entrepreneurs on the call would be interested to either nominate themselves or submit a startup for consideration. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Again, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Matt. It was such an energetic and fruitful discussion. It was really a joy listening to you both. And hopefully you guys can join us on our next webinar. Watch out for the announcement. I think it'll be on October 9th, where we'll feature another academic entrepreneur in this series. So thank you again for your time, and have a good afternoon.